All right, continuing part one of the student notes. Just kind of ran out of time. The recorder I use only has like a 15-minute time limit. Anyway, show you where we're coming from. We're talking about Mendel's experiments with peas. Let's look at these decisions he made a little closer. So this is the next part in your student notes. Shouldn't be off track at all. He chose these pea plants because they reproduce quickly. Depending on the variety of pea plant, it could be from anywhere from like 21 days from the moment that it's fertilized until we're showing peas, anywhere from 21 to about 60 days. So think about that. A human, it takes 9 months to grow a human to see what kind of traits the offspring would have. Here he can see the offspring of these pea plants in possibly even 3 weeks, at most 2 months. And then he's doing hundreds of them at a time. So he chose pea plants because they reproduce very, very quickly. Also, he could control how they would mate. So here's just a good little illustration of it. He could use a paintbrush to transfer pollen from one flower to another. I'm just looking ahead a bit. This is parts of a flower. I guess I can go on and go there. Control how they mate. One thing he would actually do if he was wanting to, if he say he had a purple flowered pea plant here, and he wanted this one to only have egg cells, he would go in with little scissors or a little knife and cut away these anthers that hold pollen, or the stamens have the anthers that top the whole pollen. So he would cut them away. That would ensure that this flower or this plant could not pollinate itself, because we might learn it later on in the year if we have time, but many plants, especially flowering variety of plants, can actually produce offspring with themselves. They contain both the sperm cell, if you will, in the form of pollen, and egg cells here in the ovary, which is down inside this structure called the pistil. Anyway, if he wanted to ensure that they weren't going to pollinate themselves, he would either cut the stamens, or if he wanted this one to be one just with pollen, he would cut the pistil and remove that ovary if he could. So anyway, he had control. That's the big thing he was after, which made his science so good. And you got to remember, he was just a monk. It wasn't like he was a leading scientist of the day or anything. Just a dude with some common sense, which is one reason I love him so much. I love studying about him. It shows, anybody in the world that has a passion for sciences, especially life sciences, can do them. So here's what he did with his experiments. Okay. We're just going to look at these purple and white flowers as the variety, or as the genes that we're looking at. But he did this for all different types of traits. Pea size, or pea color, pea was smooth or wrinkled. He talked about, he did research on the genes for like height. Anyway, we're just looking at flower color. So what he did was start out with one purebred, or at least some purebred white. Meaning, remember, purebred is they can only produce white colored flowers in their offspring. Okay, he was ensured that these were purebred. So he crossed, or he took the pollen from, say, a white flowered plant and crossed it or bred it with a purple flowered plant, also a purebred. All right, so he would take the pollen from one and vice versa too. He'd take pollen from purple and put it in the white. He had control, right? And so what he found out. Oh, by the way, they called this the parental. He called this the parental, or pea generation. This was the beginning, all right, in his experiment. The resulting plants, or what we find in this first filial, or the F1 generation, was that every flower, or every plant, had purple flowers, okay? Remember, leading thought of the day was if you mixed a purple and a white, you were going to get some kind of, light purplish hued plant. Instead, he showed that you crossed them, he was getting 100% of the time these purple flowers. This was very, very interesting. Thankfully, he didn't stop there. All right, so then what he did was he allowed the F1 generation to self-pollinate. Remember what we just saw a minute ago? Flowers, or these plants, have the potential to pollinate themselves, and that's exactly what he did. So the same purple plant in the F generation, or white, purple plant, because he didn't have white, same purple plant in the F1 generation, he would breed with itself. He would either do this by taking a paintbrush and just moving the pollen from this plant and moving it down to where the egg cell was, or he would just leave it by itself, so ensuring that bees or birds or wind didn't carry pollen from one to the other. Here's what he found in the F2 generation. So we had the parents here, then we had the offspring in the F1 generation, and then we had offspring in the F2. This F2 generation, we saw purple and white coming back. See, thank goodness he didn't stop right here, because he would have just reasoned out that, hey, if you mix purple and white, you're always going to get purple. Or if you mixed, yellow and green pea purebreds, you were always going to get green peas 100% of the time. Okay. Here's where the interesting thought came in. Why did the white come back? It had been hidden, so to say, but it didn't disappear completely. It came back in this F2 generation, even though its parents were both purple. What he saw was patterns. Okay, and one of the videos that we watched talked about this, and the data has been disputed at times because it was so perfect. And so there is some speculation that one of his associates or somebody that was working there with him might have fudged a few numbers here and there. But you could repeat this and it would still show very close to this. There was a pattern. And that pattern was about 3/4 or 3/4 of that F2 generation was always purple. All right. And about 1/4 was always white. So like we're looking right here, excuse me, flower color. I can't do math that well, but that's a little under 1,000 that they had crossed together. 929, because I can do math, I was just lying. 705 of them were purple, 224. That is a 3.15 to 1 ratio. So in other words, about every 3 or 3/4 were purple, and about 1 or every 1/4 of them were white. And this backed up what he was finding, every one of them. I want you to see why that was important, because he didn't just do this with one plant or two plants. He did it with thousands of them, okay? And because of that data, it could show how true this was. So because of his findings, he made 3 important conclusions, all right? We're going to wrap them up right here. 1, traits are inherited as discrete units. This is why that individual traits didn't just blend together or dilute. It's because looking at those flowers, we didn't have that light purple. Okay, it all goes back to black squirrel plus white squirrel equals gray squirrel. And that's what people thought at the time. He proved that that was completely false. All right. Instead, traits are discrete units. And then he has 2 other conclusions that became known as the law of segregation. One other thing that he saw and concluded was organisms inherit 2 copies of each gene, one from each parent. We've looked at meiosis, and that's kind of what's going on right here. And we see how that happens. We see that through meiosis, we get half the chromosomes or a haploid number from mom and half from dad. Here's why he saw that. Well, let me look at this second part. Organisms donate only 1 copy of each gene in their gametes. All right, but it takes 2 of each gene that comes together. All right, so he saw that based on this whole principle. Okay, where did the white come from? It had to be passed down. Somehow this white gene that popped out in the F2 generation was around in the F1 generation. It just was not being seen, all right? So this parent and this parent in the parental generation definitely passed on one or the other. Now only one of them was seen, but because these had been passed down, they were able to pass them down once again. Okay, we're going to look at this a little closer here in the next couple units. So just kind of a quick checkup. What are purebred plants or purebred any organisms? They are organisms that 100% of the time are going to pass on a certain trait, whatever trait they were out for. Okay, you might have heard purebred when it comes to like dogs or cats or other animals that have been domesticated. Purebred, cattle. It means they're guaranteed to pass on a certain trait. Okay, parental generation, filial generation 1 and filial 2 generation. I'm just looking back at what he was talking about. What are the results of Mendel's F1 cross? Remember, his F1 cross was when he self-pollinated those purple flowers in this circumstance. The results were a 3-to-1 ratio, purple to white flowers. We got about 1/4 of the flowers had white, or plants had white flowers. All right, there's a quiz following these notes. Feel free to use both of these videos and your student notes to help you.